So today we're going to be talking about, have I got a title screen? Can't remember if I sent one through. Anyway, okay, we're talking about God brings the harvest. So I personally have been around church life for at least 30 years, probably more. I've been in 3 different churches, and they were all in different denominations, as it turns out. And one thing I've noticed across my journey is that most churches are full of wonderful, faithful people, including here. Every church I've been part of has people who would quietly serve year after year. People had people who were great prayers, people who give, people who volunteer, and people who just genuinely love Jesus and sincerely want to do their part and see the kingdom grow. So on the whole, I have not found that most churches, like every church wants to progress and wants to have the biggest impact they can, but no one's really looking to be famous or successful or anything. We're just all ordinary Christians doing our best to be faithful. But here's something else I noticed. Some churches seem to grow real quickly, and some will even influence the whole city, and some will have plants coming out of them, and they'll fill up the building, and their ministries will spread and spread. And meanwhile, there are other churches that appear to be just as faithful, and just as sincere and just as committed to God's mission, yet from the outside, their impact seems to just stay local, or it seems much smaller. So why is this? Why is this? If faithfulness is the key and equals growth or equals results, then why do the outcomes sometimes look so different? Now, there are many church growth experts and consultants and conferences and podcasts and seminars that all trying to crack the secret to church growth. And generally, their message will be, this is what we did and this is what worked for us, so just copy this. But after watching church life for 30 years, I have become convinced that it's really just not that simple. There's no magical formula. If it was that easy, everyone would be doing it. It's almost like God's timing is not our timing, and God's blessings don't always look the way that we expect them to. And maybe from the outside, sometimes we are tempted to measure success in different ways to the way God measures it. So maybe the size and scale of what we're doing isn't primarily what God's interested in. Maybe he's more interested in our hearts and our motivations. All right, so here's what I'm going to try and show today. I'm going to try and show that God gives each of us, as individuals, as churches, things to do, even as families, as individuals in our all parts of our life, in our church life, in our family, in our workplace. He places opportunities and responsibilities and gifts in front of all of us. And our job is to take what he's given us and be faithful with it. We've got to serve diligently, use wisdom, and do our best with what's in front of us. And it doesn't matter if it's big or small, local or global, doesn't matter even if it's seen or unseen. It's all the same to God. All right, but the outcome, the fruit, the growth, the impact, the harvest, that is God's part. We do the work and God brings the increase. We are only responsible for the faithfulness. He is the God who brings the harvest. All right, so I'm going to try and show this today. We're going to have a look at a few things Jesus said and did, and I'll give you a few real-life examples from when I was a bit younger. We've been leaning into testimony over this year as a church, so I'll give you a few little tales of young Brad as he made his way through the world. So let's make our Bible case from Jesus himself. All right, Matthew 9, 35 to 38 says, Jesus went through all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom and healing every disease and sickness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. All right, then he said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field." So at this point in Jesus' ministry, he is about to give his disciples a job. he sends out, I think it's about 70. He sends about 70 of them out in pairs, and he tells them, go around the area and start telling people about me. And he actually tells them that it's not going to go well all the time. Right? They will probably get rejected, and people won't be interested, and they may be persecuted along the way. Right? But here's the key to us today. What is the role of the people that he's sending? Right? He's sending them as workers. He's sending them as workers. So they need to go out and they need to do the job that Jesus has given to them. But who controls the results? Who controls the harvest? Look at verse 38 there. It says, ask the Lord of the harvest. Right? So the results are not on them. The Lord is in control of the results and the harvest. And side note, right? So we want God to do big things and bless us and grow us and so on and so on. But what does he say there that if we want that, what does he say to pray for, right? He says, ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field. So if you want to pray for, God to do big things and to grow things, you should pray for workers. You should pray that there should be more workers. The harvest is there. It's there and ready. God will do that work. We need to pray for workers. Now, this may be one of those prayers that backfires on you, though, because you may be praying, God, raise up workers, raise up people to be the workers, and then suddenly you might realise, oh, it's me, isn't it? I'm the worker, right? So what is the bottleneck in what God's doing? It's lack of workers. So the harvest is there. God can bring the harvest. We need workers. All right, then Matthew 13:31. It says, Jesus told them another parable. He said, the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and planted in his field. Though it's the smallest of all the seeds, yet when it grows, it is the largest of garden plants and becomes a tree, so that the birds come and perch in its branches. All right? Easy point here, God works with the little things. He's not necessarily concerned with the size or the scale. You can bring a little and he can turn it into a lot if that's what he's going to do. All right, Luke 16:10 says, whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much, and whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. All right, and the parable of the talents later also makes pretty much the same point. So the idea here is God doesn't care whether you've got a little or a lot. He only cares whether you can be trusted with it. What are you going to do with what you've been given? Right? However, he does say here, if you show that you can be trusted with little, then you are now a candidate to be trusted with much more. But the test is, will you be faithful either way? It shouldn't matter to you. It shouldn't matter whether you've got global impact, local impact, one-on-one impact. You should be faithful in that either way. And that to God, they're all the same. All right? And, like the widow's mite, right? The widow's mite. This one wasn't even a parable. This actually happened right in front at the temple where Jesus and his disciples were. So, the story, the big shots were all loudly bringing their big cash offerings to the temple and making a big deal out of it. And then a widow comes and gives a tiny little amount, but it's all she had. And Jesus says that was more valuable because she gave all she had. So it's not the size that matters, it's the heart that God cares about. All right, so we obviously want to make as big an impact as we can, but the size of the scale or what we end up with is not really that relevant. That the harvest or result is on God. He's the God of the harvest. And your faithfulness and obedience is what he's looking for. So maybe your little will turn into much. In fact, it probably will, because Jesus said that if you're faithful with little, you'll be given much. But that's not really the point. The results or the success is basically the icing on the cake of obedience and faithfulness. So what's in front of you? What's in front of us? Big, small, medium, public, private, getting you noticed or anonymous, right? God looks straight at the heart, not the external things. Be faithful and never think it's small because things are small or no one notices that it doesn't matter. We trust God and we be faithful. We leave the results to him. All right, so as we said, we have leaned into testimony a bit. So let me give you a bit of a tale from when I was in my 20s. Now, a lot of the testimonies we have been quite heartfelt, and but you won't be needing any tissues today, right? These are not going to be tear jerkers, right? They're just silly stories of when I was a kid. So when I was younger, when I was in roughly my 20s, I was part of a church and a movement that was growing, and it was growing like crazy. And as a young man in your 20s, this is very exciting, right? It's great to be part of something bigger than yourself, and something that's having a big impact, and you're right in the middle of it. So it's good times. It's very, very inspiring to be a part of. And this was a movement that was doing things that the church had never done in Australia. They were building bigger buildings, and we were filling the biggest venues and expanding across the country and across the world. So, and kind of like franchising in a way that churches had never really done. So there would be these conferences at times, and they were filling. It was filling like stadiums, 15,000, 20,000 people. And I was quite often part of that as a volunteer, and I did various things across the years. One year they were doing like a TV show. It was like a talk show, and I don't know. I don't even know why they did it. Really, it did go out on the Christian TV channel at the time as well, and it played prior to the meetings at night. So I was part of that. I was on the production team, and I was on air a couple of times. So that was very fun. And a couple of years I did security. Now it's not. This is not like a nightclub, right? It's not like Not in Those Shoes, Mate, or I'm not breaking up fights or tossing people out. It was basically just making sure people didn't accidentally wander backstage or out into the back dock and stuff like that. So it was really just kind of ushering people around. Now, at these services, it would be that there'd be famous celebrity preachers and famous worship people all there, all right? And one time, I'm down the front, and I had a good view. I had a good view of side of stage, so I could see the whole stage, and I could see all the famous people on the stage and all the important people in the front rows, and I could also see all the way back for the 15,000 other people. And I thought to myself, like, we all look at this and we say this is all great, and it is, right? And you look at the people, the famous people on the stage, or the people with the big churches, and you think, well, that's the goal, isn't it? That's the goal, isn't it? To have the large ministry, to be the big success, to be talking to the thousands of people. And then I looked up, right, and there's all these like ushers that you can see, and their whole job is to just get people to the right seats, right? So they just get them. It's not a glamorous job, right? So they're there an hour before or whatever, and they might not even get a seat themselves. So their whole job is to just usher people to their seats. And then I thought, yeah, you know what? There's an army of people just doing stuff to make this happen, right? Behind the scenes. There's people doing like the registrations, or there's literally people who are cleaning, and there's people who stay behind real late, and there's people who get here real early, and nobody noticed. And I thought to myself, there's really no difference from God's perspective for the guy on the stage to the usher, to the person behind the scenes, to the person cleaning up after. It's all the same to him, right? Like it's from his perspective, all these people have a job to do. They're bringing what they've got, and they're bringing their contribution. And from God's perspective, he is not impressed that you get to preach to 20,000 people, or that people know who you are, or that you're famous, or anything like that. He does not care less. And in fact, the people who are just regular volunteers, right? So some of these celebrity or famous or well-known preachers, like they would literally just swan in, sometimes literally on their private jets, right? Come in, deliver a couple of messages, stay in the hotels, collect their speaking fees, and off they go, right? Now, that's fine, right? Because that was the way it worked. But the guy who's up the back ushering people, he's probably taken annual leave. Like I used to have to take annual leave to go there, and he's probably paid for his parking, you know? So God looks at that, and I thought to myself, I'm standing down the front, and I thought to myself, you know what? From God's perspective, I reckon his well done, good and faithful servant is more towards the unseen, the person making the sacrifice, than it is to the ones that we would be impressed with. All right? So in the end, the fruit and the numbers and the results are on him. Our job, no matter what your job is, maybe it's to talk to 20,000 people, maybe it's to talk to one, maybe it's to usher or to clean or whatever. All God cares about is, are you being faithful with what you have been given? All right. Now, another one, let's go back to when I was about 8 or 10. So this one, much smaller scale. So I'm not in a church of 20,000 at this point. I'm in a little Anglican church over on the Northern Beaches. And little Brad is being taken there with his family every week. And every Sunday, the kiddies, like myself, would go off to Sunday school. And this Sunday school was mainly taught by old women. It was the old ladies of the church would teach it. Now, I can't even remember their names at this point, although this is in the 80s, and in the 80s, pretty much every old lady I knew was called Doris. Right? There are a couple of Ediths or Flo's there, but I literally knew about 3 or 4 Dorises. And it seems like there was maybe 5 or 10 names you could pick from in that generation, and Doris is a popular one. So, it is a great name. It's my great-grandmother was Doris. So names come and go in generations. Like in my generation, there were a lot of Stephens and a lot of Andrews. There were about 5 or 6 of them in my school year. So anyway, every week after, much like we do here usually, after the singing, all us kids would go off to kids' church or Sunday school, as they called it. And but unlike here at Restore, it wasn't very fun. And it wasn't very interesting or engaging necessarily, probably because it was being taught by old ladies. But so ideally in programs for kids or young people, it wasn't Doris's fault, right? It's just hard when you're 2 or 3 generations removed. So ideally you have youth groups or kids' church, you have people who are kind of one life step further on who are teaching it. Not people who are kind of, you see more as like your grandma. So I never really thought, ideally you want your leaders to be kind of role models for you, but, I never really thought Doris had a lifestyle that I was, really into there. We had very little in common, right? However, Doris and the crew, right, they would be there every week and they would patiently go through whatever the program was at the time, and they'd try to make it relevant if they could, but, it was very, it wasn't that engaging either. It was more sort of learning stuff off by heart, but they just faithfully go through it every week. But here's the thing, through all of this, the basics of the Christian faith kind of sunk in when I wasn't really paying attention, right? Kind of like by osmosis. It just got into me. And by the time I was a teenager, I knew all the basics of the Christian faith, right? I knew about Jesus dying on the cross, Holy Spirit, all the Old Testament, all the main characters and their stories in the Old Testament and how it all connected. I knew the fruits of the Spirit off by heart. You got your love, your joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Now, I even knew all the books of the Bible off by heart, right? Which used to be very useful in the days when we used paper Bibles. because someone would say, turn to Haggai, and I'd be like, yeah, I'm pretty across where that is. These days it's not that hard, is it? You just search up Haggai. I can still do them off by heart. Can anyone do them off by heart? All 66. I don't want to flex and just do it, right? All right, fine, I will, okay? I can still do it to this day. I learned it when I was about 10. So, so you got Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, 2 Kings, 1 Chronicles, 2 Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, Daniel, Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, Romans, 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, 1 Thessalonians, 2 Thessalonians, 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, Titus, Philemon, Hebrews, James, 1 Peter, 2 Peter, 1 John, 2 John, 3 John, 2 Revelation. So there you go. Thanks. I sometimes get lost in the minor prophets, so got through that all right. So you learn, many times, right, Doris and the crew must have thought, why are we even bothering, right? Are these kids even paying attention? Like, it wasn't the biggest church at the time either. There weren't even that many of us. So, but you know what they did? They just kept turning up every week, not knowing if this was making any difference, if this was making any impact whatsoever. They just saw that this is a need and this is what needs to be done and I'm able to do it and I'm gonna. So they were faithful and diligent with the opportunity that God had given them. But they got through to this guy, that's for sure. But from God's perspective, whether they did or not, or whether they started a citywide revival, or if nothing came from it, it doesn't matter. It's completely irrelevant, right? God looks at that effort and says, well done. Thank you for your faithfulness. Now leave the results to me, right? He does not measure our success on the results. He measures it on our willingness and our obedience. All right, now, finally, to just hammer home the point that numbers in particular, because we're very tempted these days to measure things on numbers, and these can go all over the place, and they do not always actually represent the impact of our faithfulness. So I'm going to show you the numerical fluctuations in a particular ministry and how God brings the increase in his time and in his way. And the ministry we're going to look at is a guy you might have heard of. His name's Jesus, all right? Jesus of Nazareth, right? 2,000 years ago, this guy had a ministry and quite impactful, yeah, still going actually. All right, so here is the numerical flow of Jesus' ministry. All right, first, it's just him. And then he goes around and he recruits 12. So Peter, Andrew, James, John, Matthew, and so on. So then he's got 12, okay? And that is generally where a church or a ministry will start. You know, he's got a solid home group there that he can start. So he's got 12, right? Then he starts doing his miracles and he becomes quite well known. So the ministry starts growing, right? Especially in the region, and he's traveling around where he can. So good, very great, right? Obviously, Jesus has gone to the Church Growth Conference and he's applying the principles because he's getting a buzz going in the city. So he's getting known, all right? And then at one point, he sends, like we mentioned before, he sends out everyone in groups of twos to try and get it out wider geographically, right? And after this, things go massive, right? God is moving. Right, so he's gone 12 and then 70 or so, and now he's preaching to basically as many people as can fit within the sound of his voice. Everybody wants to hear him, right? When he feeds the 5,000, Matthew 14 says, the number of those who ate was about 5,000 men besides women and children. So probably more like 10, 15,000. So, man, this ministry is going great. We've got a mega church going here. This is so good, right? Then in John 6, he gives a slightly different angle on his preaching. So he uses a metaphor about eating his flesh and drinking his blood. And suddenly a few people don't like this. So John 6 says, after this, because he says this and people are like, ooh, that's tough, man. And so it says, after this, many of his disciples turned back and no longer walked with him. So, oh dear, numbers are down a bit. So he really hasn't, he's really not on the seeker-sensitive model here of church growth, right? Try and water down the message a bit, Jesus. You might get some more followers. But still fluctuations, right? We're rising, but still sometimes the message itself is tough. All right. So he sent out the 70. But we've still got a solid following. Everyone wants a piece of him. All right. So now he goes up. So eventually he goes up to Jerusalem. Right. He's arrested and crucified. So yada yada yada, a very important part of his life, right? But basically, all his followers scatter. Right. They all scatter. And because their leader has gone down. So then we get to Acts, right? So we've skipped quite a bit there, but we're down to quite a small group. Acts 1:15 says, in those days, Peter stood up among the believers, and it says a group numbering about 120. All right. So we started with 12. We went up to 15,000. We're now down to 120. Well, it looks like this thing is a bit of a dud, isn't it? Like, it's flamed out. This guy was preaching and well known amongst the entire area that he was in, and now we're down. He's a bit of a one-hit wonder, right? It's probably the My Sharona of his era. There's a one-hit wonder reference for you. All right. So we're down to 120. Oh dear, right? We've gone up, and we've gone down. So then comes Pentecost. The Holy Spirit falls, and the apostles get up and start preaching in the city. And Acts 2 says, those who accepted his message were baptized, and about 3,000 were added to their number that day. So do you see how God does things in his way, in his timing, right? It's never linear. And it's not a we do this, he does that formula. It's never straightforward. It's up, down, even for Jesus, right? Down to 120, 3,000 in a day, right? God's doing things in his time. Acts 2:47 says, and the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. And that's pretty much been the trajectory since then. The Lord is adding to the daily to the number of those who are being saved. And then it goes worldwide, right? So even for Jesus himself, the apparent results or the ebb and flow means nothing. God does things in his time and his way. Then the numbers, or what looks like to us like the measure of success, does not always match up to God's measure or what he's doing. All right, so as we finish, and band, can you head on up? Here is what I want us to take away from all of this, right? I said it all at the beginning, right? Every one of us has things that God has placed in front of us. Some of those things are in church, or they're in our families, or they're in our workplace, or some are relationships, opportunities, ministries, even conversations or encounters that you have with people, or people that God's entrusted to us. And when it comes to those things, there's two parts of it, right? The first is the work or the faithfulness, and that is our part. He's called us to be workers, and our responsibility is to serve diligently, be wise, work hard, love people well, and use the gifts and opportunities that God's put in front of us. And whether that is big or small, doesn't matter. It's all opportunity that God has given us. And whether anyone notices, doesn't matter. Whether it's significant or ordinary, beside the point. Right? God sees things differently than we do. We measure the size or the apparent success. God measures the faithfulness. All right, and then there's the second part, the harvest or the results. And that is not up to us. The growth or the fruit or the impact or the changed lives, those things ultimately belong to God. And we can pray and we can hope and we work towards that and we strategize, but you cannot manufacture genuine God results. God brings the harvest. And that is actually pretty good news because it means we don't have to carry the weight of outcomes. It's not our burden to bear. We don't have to, and also you don't have to compare yourself either. God is doing different things at different times with different people and different churches and whatever he's doing. We simply do the work God's given us and trust him. And maybe God will use our efforts to impact thousands. Like maybe he will, or maybe it'll be one person. And maybe you'll see the fruit immediately, or maybe it might be years later, or maybe never. No, maybe never. And none of that changes the calling. All right? So the Lord of the harvest, he'll do it in his time and his way, and we can rest in that. Thank you.